Έβδομο Διεθνές Φεστιβάλ Ντοκιμαντέρ Πελοποννήσου. 55 ταινίες, 44 πανελλήνιες πρεμιέρες, εκπαιδευτικά ντοκιμαντέρ. Διεκδικώντας την ελευθερία. Συζήτηση στρογγυλής τραπέζης με Έλληνες και ξένους πολεμικούς ανταποκριτές. Αφιερώματα. Ισότητα φύλων, βάσκικο ντοκιμαντέρ. 5 με 14 Φεβρουαρίου. Διαδικτυακά. Συντονιστείτε στο www.peloponnysosdocfestival.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 7th edition of Peloponnesus Documentary Film Festival.
Yeah.
Everyone is here, and I'm very glad. We are a bit late. We're running a bit late because we had some technical problems. We are experiencing a new kind of life, to be honest, this past year. So technical problems are a part of our quotidien, as we say. We are very, very happy to host today's roundtable discussion, claiming freedom and war correspondents. And we are extremely honored to have gathered here some very distinguished guests that I will start to present you. Let's start because I wanted to start from the only woman correspondent, but anyway, maybe she's offline. She's been having some technical issues too, and I will start with Boris Bertram. Boris, he's a film director, among others. I hope I won't forget something really. So Boris, he's a Danish award-winning filmmaker. He's a teacher, a keynote speaker, producer, and partner in Good Company Pictures. He has shot a documentary which is called Photographers of War that we are screening in the 7th edition of Peloponnesus Festival. A lot of his films have been traveling in many film festivals like the International Festival Rotterdam, the CPH Docs in Copenhagen, Hot Dogs in Canada, and so on. Boris was also working with Lars von Trier and Jürgen Leth on their documentaries. And as a director, he has a global outlook and a keen interest, let's say, on international politics, conflict resolutions, humanitarianism, and so on, and art. And we are also extremely happy to have with us Henrik Bohn Ipsen. Henrik is a cinematographer. He has been working for a large number of notable documentaries since the mid-'80s. And to be honest, we're also very happy because a few days ago, he received the Sundance Award 2021, the World Cinema Documentary Special Jury Award in Verite Filmmaking for his film President by director Camilla Nilsson. So, and it's really very nice to have you with us because, if I may say so, watching Photographers of War still carries an impact with me after 10 days of having watched it. So it's a really beautiful film, but we'll have the chance to talk about it later on. So among the speakers is also Nikolas Vafiadis. Nikolas is a very well-known, he has worked for many influential Greek newspapers, but also for Financial Times, for instance, for radio stations, including BBC World Service, Antenna Radio, and so on, magazines, TV stations, and his reports have been broadcasted by many international media like CNN, CBS News, Al Jazeera, RAI, and so on. And he has been working for one of the famous television groups, Antenna, in Greece for the last 32 years. He teaches mass media and social media in disasters and crisis in the postgraduate program, Environmental Disaster and Crisis Management Strategies in the University of Athens. And he has covered a lot of, I don't know how many crisis, conflicts and so on. And a lot of international figures like Nelson Mandela, Gorbachev, George Bush, and many that you can see his CV on our site. And he also has distinctions like awards for his subjective coverage of wars in the Gulf, for instance, in Nagorno-Karabakh, in Kosovo, in former Yugoslavia, in Iraq, Lebanon, and other spots in the planet. And in 2016, he received the European Amerigo Media Award in Florence for his overall contribution to the media. We have the Nitza Kakoseos Dominguez, who is unfortunately not yet able to connect to this live streaming. I will try to present her as soon as she is connected with us. Just for a brief, very brief introduction, to introduce you, our host and let's say moderator for tonight's live show, Nikos Megrelis, who's an award-winning journalist and filmmaker. He has also directed and presented a number of A-class documentaries and programs on current affairs and social issues. Shooting versus Shooting, for instance, 2011. He won numerous international awards and was in the short list of the Greek Film Academy Awards for Best Documentary. His latest feature documentary, it's Wherever People Are Bad, is premiered in Thessaloniki Film Festival, Documentary Film Festival, and was awarded in Aegean Docs Festival and Halkida. And he was vice president of the Greek Documentary Association. In 2020, he served also as a member of the board of the Greek Film Center. He was also the general director of ERT World. ERT is the national Greek television, and is a member of Greek Film Academy and of Athens Journalist Union. Okay, and we are going to watch some videos now, made by our hosts, by our guests.
Jeg har altid været den her torse, der skred og rejste ud og var fra alle mulige farlige steder.
The other journalists, they don't do it. They don't put themselves in that much risk, but you did it.
I have 4 kids at home. They need me back. I need to make money for them.
Og det har også altid givet mig sådan en eller anden ro, at jeg vidste, at worst case scenario, altså, så havde de deres mor. Min ekskone er blevet skidesyg. Hun har fået kræft i hjernen. Vi står med en meget, meget alvorlig diagnose, som i yderste konsekvens kan betyde, at hun ikke overlever. Det ved børnene, og det ved hun, og det ved jeg.
Jeg synes ikke rigtig, jeg er stresset.
Nej.
Den ser da meget pæn ud. Den ser sådan lidt mere ud.
Den er blevet pink.
Den ser da meget sådan lidt rock'n'roll ud.
Du kan se, den er hvid og rød. Du ved, at hvis rød blandes med hvid, så bliver det lysrødt, far.
Ja, det vidste jeg ikke. Så, Sviske.
Vi ses, far.
Love you. Ses om en uge.
God tur, ja.
Se, knægt. You're right, huh?
Τα εκρηγνιόμενα κομμάτια, τα διάπειρα υλικά που έφευγαν από το χώρο της εκρήξεως. Εδώ έχουμε μία πολύ κοντά. Άλλη μία τώρα, λοιπόν θεωρώ ότι...
Ένα από τα μαζικότερα εγκλήματα αυτού του πολέμου έβαψε με αίμα τη φετινή Πρωτομαγιά. Ολόκληρη η περιοχή γέμισε πτώματα. Οι αρχές μιλούν για 40 νεκρούς.
Δημοσιογράφοι, διπλωμάτες και ξένοι υπήκοοι εγκαταλείπουν τα τύρανα έντρομοι με τα ελικόπτερα του γαλλικού στρατού ξηράς που έχουν φτάσει εδώ στην ακτή του Δυραχείου. Την ώρα αυτή το Δυράχειο πλέγεται.
Is Nikolas Vafiadis from Antenna 1 Greek television. Nikolas nearly met with death. What happened?
We were supposed to do with this convoy.
Siamo in Afghanistan, quindi sappiamo qual è la situazione e la cosa migliore era quella di continuare ad andare avanti.
We can go live now to Nikos Vafiadis from Antenna Television. Good evening.
They haven't claimed responsibility yet. It's not their style to claim responsibility immediately after an attack.
Η ανταλλαγή πυρών στην Τζομπρίνια συνεχίστηκε σήμερα ολόκληρη τη μέρα. Οι εξελίξεις στη Γενέβη φαίνεται ότι αφήνουν αδιάφορους τους αντιμαχωμένους.
Δύο Σοβιετικοί δημοσιογράφοι αγνοούνται και δύο Ελβετοί τραυματίστηκαν ελαφρά. Στόχος έγινε και το δικό μας συνεργείο.
Εδώ στα χωριά της Ανατολικής Σλαβωνίας οι μάχες μένονται.
Οι σκηνές είναι φρικιαστικές. Το τίμημα της ανεξαρτησίας της Κροατίας βαρύ. Εκρήξεις έστελναν πύρινες γλώσσες στην οροφή του ορίζοντα.
Εδώ στην κροατική πρωτεύουσα, ανάμεσα στους συναγερμούς, οργιάζει η θυμολογία.
Όσοι βρισκόμαστε εδώ στο Ζάγκρεπ δεν θα ξεχάσουμε ποτέ.
Η κάμερα του Αντένα όχι απλώς πλησίασε το Μαλιμπεϊλί, αλλά σε παγκόσμια αποκλειστικότητα είχε στην καρδιά της μάχης και κατέγραψε ένα πανδαιμόνιο.
The career of the President of the United States was marked by some great events in the history of our planet. One of them being the...
Τελευταίες ημέρες παρατηρείται ιδιαίτερη κινητικότητα στις αεροπορικές βάσεις εδώ στην έρημο της Σαουδικής Αραβίας.
Πρώτες πρωινές ώρες οι Ιρακοί εκτόξευσαν βαλιστικό πύραυλο Σκάτζ στα σαουδαραβικά σύνορα. Πύκνωσε η ανταλλαγή πυρών μεταξύ αναγνωριστικών περιπόλων. Τραυματίστηκαν 7 Αμερικανοί. Είναι η πρώτη φορά από την έναρξη του πολέμου που συμμαχικά πλοία προς το σενάριο. Nikos Vafiadis από το Ταχράν της Σαουδικής Αραβίας και τον Αντένα.
Είδα τον καπνό να βγαίνει από το επάνω μέρος του ξενοδοχείου του Παλαιστάιν.
I wish it would have never happened, but it has happened.
Los marines, el ejército norteamericano estaba tan cerca del hotel que les podíamos mirar casi a los ojos.
Estoy en la cocina desayunando en pijama y escucho ataque al hotel palestino. En esos momentos mis piernas empecé a temblar. Se me fue un shock.
For their own safety, all foreign nationals, including journalists and inspectors, should leave Iraq immediately.
They don't need the journalists anymore.
ما عدا شغلنا كله يعني محوط بالخطر وبالموت.
The flash was in my jacket
Solo che proprio non c'è stato il tempo, no? Perché dopo 24 ore l'hanno ucciso.
I was thinking how they will kill me.
Ejército, unidad.
I want the truth. I want the facts. I want a minute-by-minute account of what happened to my father. I want to know who my father was. I want to know why the Sandinistas executed him. I want to know who pulled the trigger.
So welcome back after our videos. Last but not least, I would like to present to you Nitza Kakoseos Dominguez. Nitza is an award-winning documentary filmmaker whose personal and narrative style has met with acclaim at international film festivals and television markets. She is born and raised in Sweden by Greek parents, and with a background in journalism, and she's been working as a war correspondent in Central America in the 80s, and she's highly experienced in Latin America affairs. A lot of her major award-winning documentaries have been filmed in countries like El Salvador, Nicaragua, Chile, and Cuba. And she has experience also as a jury member in film festivals, mostly in Latin America. She gives also classes in ethics in documentary filmmaking, and also having workshops in those countries like Nicaragua, Cuba, and Sweden. And her films have been broadly screened at television stations everywhere in Europe and elsewhere. And she is currently in Stockholm, Sweden. We also have with us a committee led by Stella Papaioannou, a committee from the Department of Theatrical Studies of the University of Peloponnese. They have been watching and they have been friends with the Festival of Peloponnesus Documentary Film Festival for many years, but this year they have watched all documentaries of the Claiming Freedom section, and they will also present an award. So they will be present on our discussion, and they will be also asking questions after the end of our talk. Please don't forget that we will be expecting because we have a Q&A section after we finish the roundtable. We'll be waiting for your questions in YouTube or on Facebook, in all streaming platforms, and we'll select some of them, and we will ask our guests your questions. So please write your questions on all media platforms. So, Nikos, I guess it's time to give you thank you. Thank you very much for being here. And
thank you.
looking
Thank you
forward.
very much for the invitation. And thank you very much to Gina Petropoulou, who is leading the Peloponnese Documentary Festival. And okay, let's start from a question that I was put many times, but I never found a rational answer. And I think that everybody has his own answer. What makes a journalist, a filmmaker, a photographer to leave his home and find himself and his family and find himself in a war zone, in a conflict zone, where from the one moment to the other, he might be a victim? What drives him to these places? Okay, shall we start from from Boris?
Yes, that is also one of the questions we that started the film we made, Photographer of War, and looking into the 8 times World Press Photo Award winner Jan Graup, and how he could balance life with 4 children, apparently being the only father, and look into his work and into his actually to make a film where you felt you were present in the conflict zones with him, like being there. Very observational film, very honest film, exploring his work and his ethics in the field. So we were observing him doing his job. My personal way into this film is my curiosity and I guess a very humanistic point of view, and also being curious about people living on the edge, living places in the world where they're challenged, not only by war, but by climate change, by refugee crisis, growing megacities, and actually to acknowledge that people have a lot of resilience and creativity, even they're very much challenged. So that is my point of view into this area of filmmaking.
Thank you, Boris. Nikolas, you have been all over the world, and many times, sometimes together. I have seen you in a very difficult situations. So what makes you, again, it's the same question, what makes you leave your family and go there?
Journalist, there is first of all the journalistic duty. You have to go to places, you have to cover stories. Usually it's crime, war correspondent, it's wars, it's the advantage you have being on the front lines and watching things happen is that you become a witness of history in the making, and that is quite a strong motive. On the other hand, what Boris said, I think, is very valid, that you see people living at the edge. Usually at war zones, people don't have enough to make a living. There is starvation, there is deprivation of all human rights, there is not freedom. And the situation really can turn bad from minute to minute. I mean, you are in a peaceful neighborhood and all of a sudden bombing starts and this neighborhood does not exist in the following minute. It's insecurity. It's, it's so many things that you can't really give a definite answer, but it's living at the edge, the term that Boris used, living at the edge, that applies also to the journalist who goes there. Is by itself a motive, but I think for me personally, the strongest motive of all is that you are a witness of history in the making, Nico.
Yeah. Nitza, what's your point of view?
Well, I have a little bit different point of view because I was not flying in and out of a war zone. I was stationed in Nicaragua, and I was there for 7 years, from 1984 to 1991. And of course, to me in the beginning, when I started out as a war correspondent in Nicaragua, I must also say I was a freelancer. And being a freelancer, you take you take other risks than the people who are employed by a newspaper like New York Times or CNN or whatever. But for me, it was a personal challenge that I could make it out there, competing with male colleagues from Sweden. And the other one, the more you stayed there, the more complex the picture of the war zone became, because I wasn't only covering Nicaragua. I was based in Nicaragua, but I was covering El Salvador, I was covering Honduras, Costa Rica, Panama. I was in Guatemala as well, but basically El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica. I must say that my other colleagues here on this talk, I think you experienced another kind of war situation, because in Central America, and for instance, both in El Salvador and Nicaragua, you had like safe zones where there was actually no war at all. And you were transporting yourself to the front lines where the war was. And the more I stayed in Central America, the more covered I became, the more aware of the tremendous risks that were at stake. Because in the beginning, it was like a white book, open pages. And of course, when you stay for so long time, you also create personal relationships with the people, particularly in Nicaragua. It's so very often you have I had a completely different point of view than my editors in Stockholm, because they were always following the tracks of the big agencies, like if it happened on CNN or if it happened on ABC, it must be truth. While my picture was much more complex, and I had to, I wasn't, you know, I didn't agree with my editors. Mm-hmm. And I said, for instance, there is no such thing as concentration camps in Nicaragua. Yes, they said, but it's on CNN. Yeah, but there are not. And then I said, okay, I go north and to the same, to the zones that had been reported from. Yes. And so it was a challenge. It was, yeah, and as the other colleague here said, Nikolas Vafiadis, you're a testimony to what's actually going on, and that's, of course, changes you. It makes you very humble when it comes to the suffering of people. And
Henrik, because before I give you the floor, I would like to add some comments. I think that the one point of view is that we give voice to the voiceless. The second point of view is that if journalists are not on the spot, are not in the conflict zones, then we will leave the ground to the propaganda machines, either of the one side or to the other side. So that's why I believe that journalists should be on the spot. And thirdly, the most important thing is that journalists should stay live, should stay alive in order to tell the truth. It's very difficult. It's a very, very difficult issue to stay alive in a conflict zone. And the fourth issue is that you have always to remember that when you are embedded, that you are in a different mission with the soldiers. It's very difficult. Nikos is speaking. Nikos Megrelis.
Okay.
Yes, it's very difficult to be embedded because your life depends on the soldiers that you are every day with them, but on the same time you have to remember that your mission is quite different from theirs. They are there to fight the war, and you are there to tell about the war, and you are there to report if there are any violations of the human rights. So it's a very difficult mission, but that makes the very highly important the mission of the journalists on the conflict zones. So, Henrik, what's your point of view?
Oh, well, first of all, I see myself not as a war cinematographer, but I see myself as a documentary photographer, and the stories I've been involved in happen to be in war zones sometimes. Like in the case with the war photographer, it was the question of, could we do a documentary without filming, where the main protagonist is a big part of his life is in war zone, so it would not. So it was kind of a consequence that we have to go to the war zone to show his life and to tell the story about his life. So I don't see myself because it's not like journalism I do, but so it's well, I look upon it like this. I stayed 2 weeks, 3 weeks in Mosul. Soldiers stay 3 or 4 months. People live there. They are the real people in danger, and they are the real people who who will suffer from the consequences of a war. So if I, as a cameraman or doing documentary, can tell stories about that, I think it's important. And I know it's risky, but I also experienced in my life that I can live with dangers. I learned that very early in Afghanistan when I was unembedded in Afghanistan, and it becomes like if you can do it, you know, it's part of you, it's part of your drive. So it's double in that sense. And then, to be very frank, that's not maybe very photographical, self-centered, but I think it's the same for Jan. It's the same for a lot of people. War has the most fantastic scenography, and that's part of your aesthetic. It drives you as a cinematographer or as a still photographer.
Yeah, that's
so,
right.
So I think there's a lot of personal stuff involved in it, but there's also the fact that you show something from people's life which really has a consequence. We are not actually the heroes. That's what I tell myself all the time. The heroes are the people who live under these circumstances. And if we can show something about some images of that, I think it's great. Or maybe some counter images that you don't see normally in news or whatever.
Yeah, I think also that it's very important that when we are in a war zone and we pass the stories to our audience, then our audience can appreciate the fact that they live in peace.
Exactly.
What do you think about?
Yeah, sure. The terror of war is the terrible consequences of war should be seen from if you can show it, so it's that the audience will see it from a perspective of the victims, then that will always be, if you can get that feeling to people, I think it would be great.
Yeah. Boris, you following the life of photographer, being living two different lives, one with his 4 children and his wife that she was very ill, and on the same time living in a war zone in Mosul. Well, there was a conflict in his, let's say, in his feelings.
As I said when we talked on earlier, when Jan is when we were in Mosul, in a conflict that has been compared to Stalingrad, Jan's heartbeat is very, very slow pace compared to mine.
Mm.
When he comes back to Copenhagen, he has a very hard time to find peace. He is a damaged person. That's how he described himself, doing this for 30 years. As Henrik said also, the adrenaline and the kick he gets from going like a wall rabbit, jumping from one zone to another zone his whole life, he's not been the perfect father. He knows that. And when this happened in his life, that his ex-wife dies and he has to take care of his family, how will he do that? Will he stop going on his missions and reporting, telling the truth, giving a voice to people who doesn't have a voice? Or will he be the perfect father at home he's never been? That's an impossible task for a man like him. And I think Henrik and I realized that we didn't want to judge Jan. We just wanted to be going in, being close, going in his footprints, and just make a very honest portrait of a man, doing what we all think is important, but we very rarely show the consequences in a family. And to my surprise, Jan's children, they cope tremendously good with his absence and coming back. They are very strong young human beings, learning to become artists, learning to become photographers or journalists. I was so surprised how strong his children are. So that is also something you get out from watching this film.
Mm-hmm. Nikolas, you have a family. Did you ever had a difficult time with? Well, it's a little bit personal question. Did you ever had a difficult time with your wife, telling her that you are leaving, going to Bosnia, in the war zone, or going to Iraq?
Actually, since I started, in this business more than 30 years ago, the most difficult moment of the day was the telephone call back to the family when there was, when that was possible, because in the old days we could only do it via satellite phones, and the sat phone at the time were costing too much, to have an everyday call. And that shows you, how difficult it is. And there is one case that I had to go back home, because my young son then told me, that you have to go back, you have to come back, you have to think about us, because they were hearing stories that we were bombarded, that we were in danger, and all this stuff. But let me, if you allow me, Nikos, to make one or two points that the other speakers raised. For example, on Nitza's note that the domination of the big agencies, that is a problem for all of us. For example, I remember that when the Kosovo war started, I was actually in Pristina and I was seeing the bombs, and I called the station and said, the bombing has started. They said, no, connected with CNN, and they were translating CNN. They had their man in Pristina, and they were translating CNN that the guy was in Belgrade. and the bombs were falling just 100 yards from our hotel, and we could see the big blast, and we could hear the terrible sound, and we could see the broken glass and everything in flames, and still the domination of the big agencies, that is a problem, and that gives all the time a switched picture of truth. And one part that I feel is my mission is to correct this picture and to show and what I feel is happening on the field that I cover. And it's not just, you're not covering anecdotal stories that you saw during the day. You must have, more of a historic perspective and more of a broader sense of what is happening. And that's what I'm always trying to give our viewers, our listeners, or our readers. You have to try as hard as you can to give the historic dimensions of the events that are happening within the day. For example, I remember the 1st May of the 1999 in Kosovo was the bloodiest day of that war, and you've had at the same time 3 different places attacks. One was with a bus. You saw some pictures in the video that was shown before. The other one was at a neighborhood, and there was another one at a Pets prison, where you had hundreds of people killed. Now, to make the overall picture, to give the overall picture, you don't just have to move around fast with endangering your life, obviously, but sometimes, even our cars have been bombed, by planes, and you have to try and escape. I also, that is why the point you made that you have to remain alive story, the full story, is one of the first priority, the top priority, Nico.
Yeah. Henrik.
But may I just
yes, Nitza, yes. Sorry, Henrik. I will come to you back
the
later.
Truth is not, the truth.
We have a problem.
The truth is very complicated. It's not just one truth. I think the integrity of a journalist is very important, and of course the strive for the truth and to give a variation of pictures of what's going on. That's very important. But how could we know? Go out saying that we are going to tell just strictly the truth. I think it's not as simple as that.
Yeah. Henrik, what do you think that is the most difficult aspect of the job? This is a question that was made by someone from our audience.
Well, I think first of all, we have to make a distinction because I do documentaries, not journalism. I have a lot of respect for war correspondent journalists who takes big risks to tell a story that can change history, can change politics. I have a big respect for that. But for me, it's more like we do in the war photographer. It's a documentary about you could say living in the business of war zone photography or stuff like that. What are the consequences like that? And that interests me. And in the documentary, you also see that you see the war from a different, in Jan's pictures, you see the war from a different perspective. Because if you notice, there's always a lot of children in the pictures. There's always a connection between people or ordinary life in the war. So I see what I do more like that sense that I show another. I'm together with the directors and whatever, they show another picture of the war, not like journalism.
Mm-hmm.
And to do it I think it's not something that I think you should. It was not something I was I thought that I was going to do, but it just so happened that I worked with good directors like Boris. I worked with other directors who've been in Afghanistan with and in Mogadishu, Somalia, and places like that. But there has always been a drive with a personal drive to show something from the war. And working in war zones, it is like you have to deal with fear, your own fear, and if you can't handle that, you should not be there. So it becomes like something you can do because you can control your fear, because you know the moment you lose yourself and you get afraid, you should be afraid, but get really afraid, then you're lost. I've just found myself in that in being able to do that, and luckily I don't do it for months. I'm maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Well, I've been for months in Afghanistan, but it's not like a soldier. They stay there for 3 months in a zone. I go in and do a documentary for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, so I can see an end to things. A soldier who will be in Mosul for 3 months, I would not be. I wouldn't. I can't imagine how we must feel inside. That's how I look upon it, as part of being a documentary photographer, and I happen to be in these situations and being able to deal with it. And I would strongly say to people who are trying to go there, and if they don't feel that they can handle it, they shouldn't do it. They should really think about why they do it, and for what purpose. And personally, my purpose has been, I wanted to investigate this documentary with Boris, his vision into it, that was strong. The connection with Jan was strong. So there was some kind of bond that felt that we could do this documentary. In other documentaries I've done in Afghanistan, it's been unembedded together with a Danish journalist called Henrik. His vision was so strong that he wanted to show in Helmand the civilian living condition under a war. And I felt that his mission was so strong that I really could take part of it, and it had a purpose. So that helps a lot.
I think that your point of view is raising again how important it is to make documentaries, but also to being a war correspondent, and being on the spot, because you cannot leave the coverage of a war to the propaganda machines of the war sides. So that's the why it's needed to produce documentaries. That's why it's needed to have war correspondents in the war zones. And I'm afraid that now, at this period, we learn less and less things about wars that are going on. For instance, Nagorno-Karabakh had very less coverage. Isn't like so, Nicholas? Do you agree with that?
I went actually to Nagorno-Karabakh just a couple of days before the end of the war, just before it got really ugly, and you could see people living at the edge. Now the coverage, you have two crises going on at the same time, one being the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, and the other being the financial crisis that comes out of the pandemic. And that means that most of the media do not spend a lot of money on war coverage, because it's an expensive mission. You have to have a lot of stuff there to survive and to cover a conflict in a fair way. So, I mean, many abstain from that, get instead whatever the international news agencies hand out. And thus, they don't have the coverage they should have. Now, on the, you mentioned the embedded journalist. I actually haven't been embedded throughout my career. I've chosen not to edit, but sometimes you have to do it. The embedded, I remember in the first Gulf War, for example, the embedded journalists gave us a lot of reports because they were sending their reports in a pool. We had a pool because not everyone could get embedded. So those who were, they were, pooling their stories, and so that gave us a broader sense of what was going on in different fronts. For example, the embedded journalist with a forward unit in Kuwait could give us a sense of what is going on in the Western Desert, or someone who was, in the on a aircraft carrier, on an American aircraft carrier, a sense, of what kind of forces were joining in the region, and that gave us a better chance to have an overall coverage of the conflict, and in a more fair way. But as Nitza put it, the truth is very difficult to define. First of all, because there are many facets of the truth, and the other big element, I think, is the freedom, and which is also our subject. The freedom that you're not free to go anywhere you like, any place you like when you're a war correspondent. You have to go to work with the authorities there to allow you, particular access in places that are dangerous and in the front lines. Sometimes you have to sort of do some favors for them in order to get access to the front line and have the right picture. And that means that if, as a medium, you want a fair coverage, you must cover both sides with different correspondents, because the most dangerous, to answer the question, the most dangerous part of the job is when you cross lines, when you go from the one side to the other. I've done that many times, and every time I put my life in danger that I did that. We've been shot at, we've been bombed at, and it's really dangerous.
Nitza, I have a question from Sofia Pulupati. She wrote her question on Facebook.
Yeah.
And I would like to start from you. What is the role of female war correspondents, and how are they viewed by colleagues in the military?
Okay, very good question. But let's start with the role of a female war correspondent. I don't think there is such thing as female journalism. I think there is only, it's journalism. Of course, as a woman, you might have a point of view, but I think you look for the same stories as your male colleagues. At least I did. When you live in a war zone for a long time, of course, the majority of the correspondents who were in Central America, they were men, but there were also a lot of, particularly the American press, was sending out a lot of women in those days. By the end of 90s, beginning of the by the end of the 80s and beginning of the 90s, and to many of them, it was a career. You made your career, a professional career, by going to places that were difficult, and if you were in a war zone, that per se was a difficult situation. I didn't feel discriminated by male colleagues, but I felt discriminated perhaps by the editors at home, who didn't. If we're two people at the same area and it was dangerous, they almost always sent the male journalist to that spot. But I think that was a big mistake from them, because the next question is, how were you treated by the military? And that's very, very interesting, because as a female correspondent, you could put questions that were in a way, you put them in a sort of innocent way, like in an innocent way, playing a little bit with the militaries, pretending that you didn't understand exactly the situation, and that was something that male journalists could not lose that in prestige, letting the military know that they didn't understand. I understood, but you put the question as though you don't really understand, and you receive a very complex and full answer. Always, they were always telling more than they were supposed to be. So, in a way, that was a little, I don't know. To go back to the first question, I would like to put that question to my colleagues here today. Is there such thing as female journalism? Did you experience that when you were out doing your things?
Yeah, let's start from Boris.
Well, I can take a personal story, anecdote from just the front line in Mosul. Henrik and Jan and I, we got the news that there was this Danish correspondent, Puk Damsgaard. She's a very famous Danish correspondent, and she was embedded with the Iraqi Special Forces Air Force, who was lasering, the bombing inside Mosul, and she was camping, like 2 kilometers from the front line, writing a book about these 35 soldiers and their life that came out last year. And she stayed there, I think, for several months, almost as close as us. She didn't go exactly into the front line with where it was, suicide bombers, snipers, very asymmetric warfare, but she was as close as you can get. And I think her book, when it came out, it had the most brilliant journalism about the Battle of Mosul. In a different way than our film, because our film is in a way more like a journey into the war zone and going out. She was giving a very, a novel perspective on war, following these soldiers. I have never, for me, some of the best war correspondents are female. Maybe I'm also from a different generation, but I really don't distinguish between, men and women in the field. But Puk Damsgaard had so much balls, to live there for so many months. And these soldiers, they did everything for her, they really, she became one of them. And she invited us in for tea. We were sitting out on the rooftop of her little barrack, and she was explaining us very many complex details about the war situation that we didn't get being with Jan. We had first-hand views of from the battlefield, and we covered a massacre inside Mosul. But it was our film is a way, as Henrik said, it was more like traveling into the war zone, meeting refugees going out, being shot at, and Puk did a very different, more in-depth, I will say, analysis of the war.
Yeah, Henrik, you
raised. Yeah, well, in Mosul there was also another Danish journalist called Anne Erling. She went in there several times in the zone. Found we actually used her setup to get into Mosul, her contacts. She was very well connected. So and she went in on same as any male would do, and she got her stories. She was a freelancer, and she got her stories told in the newspapers, television. She took the same chances as everybody else. I saw a Dutch team of ladies while we're in there, a still photographer and a journalist. So I don't think there's any sort of difference. The drive, whatever you're a male or a woman, doesn't matter. If you have a drive to do it, you do it. And I think maybe the difference is that how do you make, what kind of setup do you have? Because you are so dependent on the setup that you are having if you're in Mosul, Afghanistan, the fixers, your security, your connections to local journalists who lots of time provides you with a lot of information, with a lot of access you couldn't get yourself. So a lot of that, I think everybody has to deal with that, whether it's male or women. So that's the. So I don't see there's any difference in that sense.
Yeah, I do agree.
That's a very important thing. Wherever you are in Warsaw, your local contacts, the local journalists, are very, very important for you because they provide you access, and and the way they deal, the way they handle the situation is very important for the security. So you really have to have good, or you call them fixers or journalists, whatever they are. Your in what you do, your biggest security actually, and you can trust them, and you know them. That's number one, I think, in any conflict zone, in any war zone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Nikolas. We have a lot of Greek female correspondents, war correspondents, and I think that they did well during the war coverages in the last 20 at least years that I can remember. But what's your point of view? I think that
I think there are good journalists, bad journalists, and war correspondents, and medium journalists, either female or male. So there are some bright paradigms, actually, of excellent female war correspondents, male war correspondents, and there are some awful examples of people who don't know where they are, either be it female or male. But the most important point is that female war correspondents share exactly the same dangers on the front line. And unfortunately, I lived that. When our convoy in Afghanistan was attacked, Carlos Fuentes, my friend, was killed, but also Maria Grazia Kutuli, my friend too, she was killed too. They were killed together. So there is no point at separating or saying, female correspondents or male correspondents. It's good or bad correspondence.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that everybody agrees with you on that point. Yes, I do have a very good correspondent, a friend of mine, who provided me a very prestigious footage on Palestine Hotel, Mika Yamamoto. She was killed, she was murdered actually, during the Syria civil war by a sniper. So when you are in the front line and not in hotel pretending that you are in the front line, because we have also this kind of war correspondence. When you are in the front line, either you are female or male, the dangers are the same. But we have a very interesting question from Angeliki Spiropoulou. Can we have her on the screen, or should I make the question? So Angeliki Spiropoulou is saying, do you have control of what finally? She's the Angeliki Spiropoulou is the president of the university in theatrical department. Do you have control of what finally gets shown in the media? Do you ever feel that what eventually gets shown to the public betrays the reality you want to represent? Well, this is a question, I think, mostly for Nikolas and Nitza. Nitza, would you like to answer that?
I mean, you can't have control of what you can have control if what you write, but you cannot have control if you just file material to a front desk in, for instance, Sweden. As I told you, when I was working for Greek, I was sending material from Central America to Greek newspapers. And the first thing I took up with them was, are you going to change my text? Because if you do, I really can't see how I would be able to cooperate with you. And they didn't. They were very respectful to what to everything I wrote. So, but I did mention the question to them, because for me, of course, I mean, you don't want your words to be twisted. But I think it's very complex today, because news travels very, very fast today. And in those days, when I was in Central America, it wasn't as sophisticated, the speed of communication. But of course, I mean, I think it's unethical to change point of views, because if you are an editor at home, I think it's very, very important that they put confidence in the words of the correspondent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nicholas?
Actually, I have been working for television 33 years now, and you know that television is a group sport. So it's not just you, because you send the picture and parts of the interview. It's the editor who will put things in order. Now, at some point, we established, all the facilities to do the job, I remember in Bosnia, for example, I got awarded for a report on Chetniks that was never aired from our station, because I sent it and they had some internal, at that day, they had some important local stories. It didn't play at all. Some other times, I mean, it gets cut so badly that you don't recognize the story. I mean, you send usually sometimes you have feature stories. You build it around a human being, a person. And when you see it on air, you don't recognize the story. But usually, I mean, I was blessed enough to get, the kind of coverage, the stories I sent, the spirit was the same. Okay, sometimes they were edited, some others not. But I was lucky enough, to have the greatest majority of my stories through. Yeah. And especially when I worked for Eleftherotypia, for example, they didn't touch a word,
Yeah, okay. Eleftherotypia was a unique newspaper. It was a newspaper that was set up by journalists.
On Antenna, you have the experience yourself that they don't, play with the meaning of the story or the message of the story. Yes,
that's right. Yes, they in our when I was working in Antenna, I had the feeling that they were respecting the journalists who were on the spot. Yes, totally. So I have another question from our audience. Kyriakos Liarakos is asking, whose side are you on? How difficult is journalistic ethics when you are facing so much blood?
Oh my God.
That's a tough one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Boris?
Yeah, I can give a I mean, I can give a short account of what we happened during the Battle of Mosul. First of all, we in Mosul you had Islamic State occupying the city for 2 years, and you have Iraqi forces first of all taking West Mosul. Doing that, they lost almost between 65 and 70% of their forces occupying or conquering the west side of, the east side of Mosul, and then trying to go into the west side. They became a little bit better, but there were so many casualties taking this city. It was a very bloody war. You had 2 million civilians trying to get out of the city. You had families coming out, being shot at, children being shot in the arms, fleeing the city. And we met these families coming out of Mosul on the highway. And so I think our mission was really to tell the longer narrative about the consequences of this war in Iraq, in Mosul. And at a certain point, we came in with the special forces, and we got a hint that there has been a massacre that we couldn't cover. 23 civilians was shot, and we didn't know at that time if it was Islamic State or the Iraqi forces who've done this. But Jan and his and our fixer Rebin, they chose to go in the next day without permission. We crossed the front line without permission to go in and film. We faked our way in, said we forgot a battery for the camera, and Jan managed to photographer, to take pictures of this massacre. Kids and family members shot on close hold in an alley, and when we came back to Denmark, Danish media, they didn't want to print the pictures because we couldn't say exactly who did it. Was it Islamic State or was it the special Iraqi forces? And it was horrible pictures. But of course, in the end, they came out on a global scale, these pictures, to show, what a inhumane battle zone it was. And I don't think when we were in there that we were, of course you are on the side of civilians, and the Iraqi forces were protecting us. So I don't think there was any doubt whose side we were on. But we were also trying to show the real story, uncut, in a long narrative, 78 minutes. So that's what documentary filmmaking can do. You can give a much more, sometimes, complex view of the war zone. And I have many friends working as journalists and war correspondents, and we all work together. That's what I feel when we are covering a war. We just have different ways of telling the story. So yeah, that's my point of view on this.
Mm-hmm. Henrik, what's your experience?
Well, the documentary, we are so lucky that, it's, a documentary is very much a personal film from the view of the director.
Mm.
So the whole, we're not bound by journalistic sources and facts in that way. So it's more a view into a world that we find interesting to show the rest of the world. So in that sense, it's different from journalism. But of course, there's no doubt in Mosul whose side you're on, because what you see, what the damage is, and the consequences for civilians is so crazy that, of course, you know which side you're on.
Yeah, Nitza.
Yeah, you're always at least for me, it was easy to take stands in a way when you were in situations where the civilian population were at harms. I mean, how could you not report what they were going to go through, regardless who hold the gun, so to speak. But when I went into filmmaking later on, when I came back from Central America, I switched format and I became a documentary filmmaker. And as such, you were, of course, I was much more personal, as you say. My documentaries allowed me perhaps to take a side, while when I was a journalist, the only side you could really take was when the civilian population was suffering. You could not take a side. And also, of course, in the case of Central America, where you had, and if you were in Nicaragua and you were reporting from the Contra-revolutionaries, you could not set aside the incredible support they were given from the United States and the harm that made to farmers and villages and so on. And of course, I mean, if that was to take side, I did in a way. But it was on a more humanitarian level that I took sides. Not on a political level, so to speak. I mean, what side could you take? I was embedded once 6 days with the counter-revolutionaries in the south of Costa Rica. We were supposed to be more journalists, but they dropped out, so I was alone. And I was the only woman. The rest were like 600 Contra soldiers and the commanders. And that reportage, of course, also showed my how afraid, I mean, how scared I was. But it did give, I think, a very true picture from the cruelties that the Contras did. But I never heard. It was a very important reportage, a big reportage. I think it was published also in Greek newspapers. But I was never accused for having taken stands. It was like, I mean, I was witnessing what I witnessed. I wrote. So,
Nikolas, being a war correspondent, especially in Greece, especially covering the war, the civil war in Yugoslavia, because the Greeks, there were a little bit, let's say, on the same, not all the Greeks, but the majority, they were on the side of, let's say, of the Orthodox, by religion, I mean Orthodox, the Yugoslavs and the Serbs. So it was very tough it was very difficult to report on let's say, on an objective way. Do you have the same feeling?
No. I think, first of all, that in a war, there are no angels. There are many devils, but no angels.
That's right, yes.
Now, if you want an authoritative coverage, not taking part, you send two correspondents, as I said, one to the one side and one to the other side. Why? Because the journalist, apart from the truth and apart from the facts, he also conveys sentiment. And when you see, because both sides are suffering in a war, obviously the war correspondent that covers the one side will convey the feelings, and the suffering of these people. And you need to have another one on the other side so that you also see how complicated the truth is and how to put the puzzles, of the broader picture, because otherwise you have a distorted idea of what's going on in the war zone. Now, of course, many people have, many Greek correspondents have been accused of taking part especially in the Bosnian War, or in the generally to the Yugoslav, civil conflicts. But if you see how distorted also the picture in the West was, you could also say that it was a one-sided coverage. Instead, for example, I covered the war in Croatia. I covered it from with the Croats in the front lines and with the Serbs in the front lines. The war in Kosovo, I covered it with the Albanians because I had friends and I followed them, even in their exodus, and with the Serbs. In the first, when it all started, in Slovenia, I went with the Slovenes. Covered it from the side of the Slovenes. So altogether, if you look at the picture, I've mostly covered it from a non-Serb, and I've spent much more time from a non-Serb side than from the Serb side. But altogether, if I put the whole story together, I think it was. But if you look at day by day, when I was in Slovenia, I was with the suffering Slovenes, of course, because I was, I was reporting on their suffering and on the situation. They were bombed, When I was with the Croats, I almost got killed. You had it in the picture. There is actually one frame where you can see the bullet on my back. I was shot at by a sniper at the time. So, but I've also been hit by Muslim snipers in Sarajevo and survived. But it's difficult. Actually, the only side we should be on is the side of truth. And I'm going to show you the first casualty, where you have a very nice sketch where you see the war correspondent writing his story, and there is a body of a woman, and that is the truth.
Yes.
After Hiram. Actually, that's a very nice book, by Philip Knightley. I think you were with Philip in 2003. I have his,
very nice.
Yeah, and this story really gives you all the dimensions of what it is to take sides. How war correspondent takes sides. And I have also his, handwriting here. I don't know if I can show it. No, I cannot.
Yes, Philip Knight. I interviewed him.
There it is.
In my film, Shooting versus Shooting.
Of course.
So
that's why I mentioned him, because that is very excellent book that tells you the whole thing. You do take sides, the side of the suffering, and if you are in one side, it's the one side that suffers. If you're on the other side, it's the other side that suffers, because everybody's suffering because of the war.
Yeah.
Can I add one thing?
Yes, please. Yes.
While for us as documentary makers, in a way, our perspective is very much Jan Graup's way into covering a conflict. And he takes pictures, for instance, when he covered the massacre, these pictures will sometimes often be used as evidence in war crimes, used in the tribunal in Hague, some of his pictures. And at the same time, he takes these very poetic, sometimes, pictures of children in the outskirts of a conflict zone, where people actually look at what's going on, because there's a certain aesthetic to his pictures. So he's making two different kind of documenting the conflict. He's making sometimes evidence of war crimes, but he's also showing very subjective pictures. And in many ways, our film is just very subjective. It's our point of view following this photographer into the war zone. So we are not really taking stand. So it's just to say that it is an extremely complex situation, I think, as a war photographer, that your images can be used in many different ways, and you have a personal language as a photographer where you try to get people's attention to look at the conflict and not turning their their head away. So I think it's a very interesting discussion, also like your personal stand and in a conflict, but it's also about getting the public involved in the conflict in order to stop it on a political level.
Yeah, in order to stop it and in order to protect the civil rights, the human rights. Stella Papakonstantinou.
I lost you.
Yes, do you follow me?
Yes. Hi.
Hi, Stella.
Hi.
Yes, we're here we are listening to your question.
You mentioned before the importance of the local journalists and the local informants while doing your job, while at the field, either as correspondents or as filmmakers. But I was just wondering whether you have ever encountered a language barrier or a cultural barrier while doing the job that totally misled you, or that totally made you say, oh my God, I wish I spoke the language, or I wish I had more information from the local field.
That's a very interesting question. Henrik, what do you think about?
Well, yes, there are good journalists, bad journalists, and medium journalists, as Nikolas said. There's also good fixers, bad fixers, and very bad fixers. There is in Afghanistan, for instance, it can be very difficult to find fixers who speak very good English. And my golden rule is very often the better English they speak, the more trouble you have. Because maybe they come from a different layer of society if they speak very well English. And so you have to have a lot of knowledge with who you're working with. For instance, what kind of tribe are you connected to in the area? There's a big difference being from Kabul or being from Lashkar or Geresh, being Pashtun or Dari. So all these things you have to check out. You have to know. You have to do your background research very well before you go into a war zone with the people you're working with. So there are fixers who will give you the story they think that you should have, and they will probably translate. They could translate a story into what they think you will have, because it's also a job for them. So, and they want you to have the story that you maybe are looking for if you're talking journalism. But very often in documentary, you are connected to a certain subject, and in that subject matter, you probably have people who are involved locally in the matter. For instance, in Afghanistan, I worked with where we had local civilians who filmed the attacks when they were being attacked, or Taliban were using them as cover. They were filming with mobile phones. You needed a lot of trust, because it was dangerous for the civilians to give us the material. It was dangerous for them to film. So we worked with local journalists who didn't speak English, but we had I was so lucky. I worked with a Danish Afghan journalist, so he knew a bit of Pashtun, but Dari. So you work within the trust of people if you are in a war zone. But I think I have experienced that fixers who are maybe working on a short-term basis, get us a story from a refugee camp or something like that, and they have connections, and they don't want to say, well, we couldn't get what you want, so they fix something that they think you want. That happens, but it's up to you to check your background and check out the people you're working with, and that's part of experience, and it's part of being in different cultures, checking the background of the culture, having people around you that you trust, and know their motivation for doing the job. For instance, in Mosul, we had one fixer who definitely was very good at English, but his setup was dangerous because he so much wanted to, and he had a big business going, and he wanted things to happen. So he took chances with wrong drivers who didn't know Mosul, which was a big disadvantage in Mosul, because if you go in there, it's like a labyrinth. You really need people around you who can find their way in and out. So basically it is finding out the local people that really knows what the situation is. And very often you find, you should find people who are, you should really check their motivation. What are the motivation for doing what they do? Because they very often take big risks, even bigger risks than we do, because they have to stay in the country after we're left. Like in Helmand, it's dangerous being against Taliban in Helmand, being for foreigners. That's dangerous living there. Right now they're killing local journalists in Helmand. Lost one of our one we worked together with in Helmand. He got killed 1 month ago. So you know, it's dangerous, and that is, I think, number one. And maybe we should think about that. A lot of these local journalists, they should maybe have a bigger voice in the media, because very often they are providing the stories for global media, but they don't really, not very often, have a voice. I see in Afghanistan now, luckily, they're getting better and better, and their voice are heard, and they are being hired by Washington Post, New York Times, and so on, to do stories, which is good.
Yep. Thank you, Henrik. It was very. I liked very much your point of view. Boris, do you have something to add?
Not really. I think it's an interesting discussion. We talk about journalism and very subjective documentary making, but I think on a personal level we share the same values, I think, in many ways of treating the people we work with respect and high ethical conduct. And I think it's important to have both journalistic, more traditional journalism covering a conflict, and also having the longer format that documentary can provide. So I really enjoyed this conversation, Nikolas and Nitza. It's been a great honor to meet you and hear your point of views.
Nitza would like something to add on Henrik's comments. Nitza, we can't hear you.
Henrik, you touched really upon the nerve of war correspondents in those very dramatic areas, because the thing is, what happens once you have left? What happens to the fixers? What happens to the people in your story once you have left? And when they are exposed, you know, in your own countries. Now, the documentary of Boris is different, because it's about a Danish guy, and he goes back to Denmark. I mean, nothing, of course, things can happen to him since he goes back and forth. But I'm thinking a bit of what you said about the fixers and the danger they live in, and also how dependent you have to be on the fixers, since you don't know the language. In Central America, I mean, 90% of all the journalists who were based in Central America, they were fluent in Spanish. We didn't have fixers. We became, I was a fixer of many people, and being a fixer, of course, I had the story in my hand. I could sort of decide on what level you were going to go with the journalist, on dangerous things or more human touch stories or whatever. You had quite a lot of power, and I imagine your fixers in your war zones, I mean, they could, they had the power to take you into a certain direction, or no? I'm asking, did they?
If I can add one thing.
Yes.
Nitza, our fixer Rebin, who's also in the film, he was a Kurdish officer.
Guy.
Yeah, he saved He saved our lives a few times. That is as simple as it can be said. You know, he made us come out alive. So I can only say that to choose that person, that made the whole difference. You know, failure or success.
I wanted to say something about your film. I think it's an extremely important film because it's so unmasked. It's so pure. Something. It's not glamorized at all. There's no. You really show how ugly it must. You know, how ugly the situation around you and how difficult it was for you as a filmmaker and for him as the main character, and also, as I told you, Boris, I mean, he had a choice after he came. Did he have a choice, or did he not have a choice to go back to a normal life after so many years in a war zone? That's. I had this feeling he didn't have a choice, because he had to go on doing this kind of war stories and war photography. Because what would he do in Copenhagen? Of course, he had this fantastic machine from 18th century, the still photography where he took portraits. You know, happily he has that, but he cannot make a living out of that. But he was making a living out of this. Out of his war stories, and I feel sorry for him somehow. You know, he was getting older, his health was faltering, and there he was, still after 30 years doing these stories. And then when you had this feeling, all he wanted was to be back with his family, with his children. It was an excellent film, really. Congratulations to both of you. You as a photographer, Henrik, and you as a director. Really very good.
Yeah, Nikolas, you have been in many places and you have met a lot of fixers. Do you keep still contact with some of them?
If you want to climb to Mount Everest, you have to be based on Sherpas. The Sherpas will take you to the top. The Sherpas will decide if you are living or not. It's exactly the same thing with fixers in war zones. Hadn't I had my good angel in Afghanistan, I would be dead now. Because we were caught, you know, by the Taliban, and they wanted to diver Abdul Hadi, who really saved our life. The same happened, you know, many times with many fixers all over the world that I've worked with. We still keep contact with many of them. Even now, I mean, that I went to Nagorno-Karabakh, I mean, we had an excellent fixer. But one point that I want to make is that you don't always have the time to choose the fixers. When we entered Afghanistan, I had a guy booked from Pakistan. I booked him from Pakistan. He spoke good English, as you know, Henrik said, but he was a bad guy. He left us, I mean, we were supposed to be, to have a driver and everything at the border, and he left us at the border alone with all our stuff in the middle of nowhere, having the flag of the Taliban on our head, and many locals around us who wanted, to kill us and take our stuff.
Oh my God.
No.
Terrible.
Can I?
Yes, Henrik. Yes.
I understand Nikolas' problem because news works very fast, but a part of it is that part of the thing being in these zones, it is that you also have to learn. Nikolas didn't have time, but you try and judge situations. Do you really trust this guy or whatever? And in this case, with Rabin, it was, we asked him his motivation. And I think it was the best motivation ever. He had been a Peshmerga. He had been in the war. He's been injured in the war. And his motivation for going into Mosul was that the Mosul war, from a strategical military point, is an unique war. Nobody knows a lot about this war, especially not on high military level. So his motivation was very, very simple. I want to study this war as close as I can get and learn as much as I can get, because in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, I will be the one who can tell in military strategy what happened. I thought that was a very good motivation. I felt safe with a guy who had that kind of motivation.
Yeah. Okay, I have a question from Markela Manatu. Would you have taken the job if you knew how hard it is? Okay. Boris. Let's start from Boris and then go to Nitza.
I definitely don't think I would have been going into Mosul in the first place, being stuck in there between being stuck with snipers, suicide bombers, and not really knowing where the front line is. It was it just happened. We came in with a convoy and we decided to follow the story. And I, on a personal level, I also suffer from this film. I mean, it traumatized me in a way that I'm still trying to find out exactly how I have been traumatized. But I had difficulties with sleeping and reading. But I think so. In many ways, it's a very tough question, But my love to doing what I do and to work with Henrik and Jan was, I truly enjoyed doing the film. And I think it was an important film. I know that today, war photographers and journalists, the living condition in conflict zones are so difficult now. You cannot get insured. The big newspapers are not taking care of you. How are we getting reports from the conflict zones? So my film was also like a contribution to these people and their working conditions. On a personal level, I can't really say if it was worth doing it, but I think it's a meaningful work to do. That's how I can put it.
Yeah, Nitza.
When I left Central America in the beginning of the 90s, I left Central America on its path to peace. I had been there for so many years during the wartime, and leaving, it was on its path to peace. Nicaragua was definitely on the path to peace. El Salvador was going towards peace. So when I came back to Sweden, I suffered a lot from post-traumatic stress symptoms. I was extremely sensitive to different kind of noise, always expecting that there was a bomb or somebody was shooting. It took a while to sort of it took a long time to go back to normal. But meanwhile, I also changed my career. I went into documentary filmmaking, and I remember. What I do remember very, very much is people were asking me, editors and people, colleagues in journalism, aren't you going to the former Yugoslavia? Aren't you going to cover the wars in Bosnia, in Kosovo, and later on Iraq and everything? And I remember it so well. The relief I felt. No, I will never go back to a war zone. And I haven't gone back to a war zone since then. I really felt I was lucky to have survived so many years. I never felt the urge, to go and prove myself that I can make this. I really felt I lived that to other ones. But what I did in all my films, in all my documentaries, what I did focus on was what happens on a personal level when a war is over. So it's the same. The question is, what happens after a civil war is open? What happens after Salvador, when Salvador went from war to war, guerrilla warfare to peace, and so all my films is around the same issue. What happens when a war ends? So no. I would never do that again. So I leave that to the young ones.
Henrik, you still are going to war.
Oh, well, I've just been in Afghanistan, but it was pretty calm, and I didn't go to any front line. It's very difficult to go to front line right now in Afghanistan, and it's not to go to the front line. The thing I did in Afghanistan, it's for me, it's more like I'm with people I trust. I'm with people I like. We have a mission to tell us. We have a goal to tell a story that we think is important. So and I trust the people I'm around, and I like it. And it so happens I like Afghanistan. I like Erbil, the people in Erbil. I like Mogadishu. I love Mogadishu. So it's difficult for me to say why. That's I have to dig somewhere where I don't know where to dig. But I can say living with it is, which I am very aware, which some journalists don't have that, maybe have that luxury. After Mosul, I didn't go anywhere for a year or something like that. I think I haven't been, oh yes, I was in Zimbabwe, but that was a coincidence. But I think that the thing is that it's difficult. It is that you have to, especially as a documentary cinematographer, whatever it's in Mosul, Zimbabwe, wherever it is that you have to carry. It's emotional. You have to carry a lot of emotions, and it's too much a load of emotions. Even though if you're filming some people with big problems here in Copenhagen, junkies or whatever. All these emotions are influencing your daily life, because you still have to be an empathic person. You can't be hard, and so all these emotions attached to you, and they're difficult to leave aside in your daily life, and that's, I think, it's the main issue with these things. It is that you have to they infect your daily life. You don't have a daily life like from 8 to 4, and you lost that capacity somehow. I don't know if it makes sense, but I don't know why you do it. It's I think it's you just like to have you just like to try and do something important. I think that's it. I don't know.
Yeah, Nikolas.
Well, I've done it 16 times so far. 16 times so far. If I had any hesitation, I wouldn't go to the next front line. I've done it 16 times, and I'm here for the next 16 ones, you know, to make it 32.
But did you ever suffer from post-traumatic?
I think my whole life is a post-traumatic syndrome situation.
Let me ask you.
I think you should talk to Jan.
I would like to ask you something to everybody. Do you feel boring when you are back home? When you are back home to your daily life, do you feel bored when you are doing your daily things?
That's a very good question. I did in the beginning. I must say, Nikos, life was very boring for a long time. It was like an endless, nothing happened. It was very boring in the beginning. Then you got used to your everyday life again, your family, your friends, and also starting a new professional career. That helped a lot. But yes, part of the post-stress trauma is, you know, living a very ordinary life in a way. That was scary in a way.
Boris?
Yeah, I can make a very short comment on this. I mean, as a filmmaker, you go out filming and then you come back and then you have maybe a few hundred hours of material. So you also go into the editing room where you actually start to create your story. And I think in a way it is primary experience you are watching when you're editing. So you live it through one more time, so you get the thrill one more time. With this film, I experienced something very unusual. I was sitting with my editor, Charlotte Bengtsen, and I constantly fell asleep when we watched sequences from the battlefield. I passed out, and I heard a colleague of mine who did Faraz, who did The Cave, who was nominated for Oscar, I think, last year. He was also editing in Copenhagen, and he had exactly the same experience, that he was falling asleep as well. And I think it's the impact of this primary experience that it hits your body one more time, and you kind of want to keep your eyes distance from it. I think so. So yeah, there's been very many different aspects of dealing with being in a conflict zone, making the story, you know, the responsibility for Jan and his children to make a film where he's also in a way likable, because you have a responsibility for him, even if he can be an asshole. So I also have to do my job and not be too influenced by things. And I think now when I think what is it now, Henrik? 2 or 3 years since we got back. We filmed in 2017, the last one, so it's 3 years, and I have had time now more to digest and understand the impact. But I don't think life is boring. I love my life at home as well.
Henrik,
what was the question? If I was
the question is if you are when you are back home.
No, I'm so lucky that. I do a lot of different documentaries, so I am, I jump from one subject to another, which can sometimes be difficult because you want to be emotional attached to what you are doing, and sometimes if you come back from a war zone, you have a period where everything seems meaningless, and so you struggle a little bit with going to a supermarket and stupid bicycles shouting at you in Copenhagen and stuff like that. That's really your life. You have a a crazy perspective of your own on your own life for a small period, but you try to analyze it. So and then I'm just happy to be back with my.
But in my case, I was there for such a long period, and coming back to Sweden, it was one thing that really struck me was that you couldn't really share your experiences and your memories with just anybody because they were not interested, and you had so much within yourself, which was, you know, part of also the post-traumatic stress symptoms, that you wanted to release your experiences, but the only people you could really share your experiences with were other journalists who had left also. So my life isn't boring. It was in the beginning, the first year, it was both this living with these post-traumatic stress symptoms. On the other hand, living on a very low level of adrenaline. Nothing really happened that could compare to the everyday life in a war zone. Eventually I got over that, and I'm very grateful for all my experiences.
I think one of the things is that you get you have a period when you're home when you think, why can't people just be happy for their life? You get a sort of anger in you looking around and saying, but be happy for your life. There are people left in Mosul, so you don't feel connected to anything normal, and that can be. But I think I know what's going on, so I'm constantly trying to handle it.
Nicholas, I'm not going to put this question to you.
No. I know when to say no. I think that's very important. That you know, find your own limits. And I have said no to jobs because I knew I would go beyond the border I didn't want to go. If I continued after Mosul, if I continue other places, I know I would have crossed a border I didn't want to cross.
Nicholas, I'm not going to put the same question on you, because I know that being a journalist, and being a journalist as you are, being the head of the foreign section of Antena, being an anchorman also of news anchorman, and being so much active as you are, I don't think that you feel bored. You don't have time to be bored.
I think that the real front, the news. So you leave the real war and you come to the virtual war of every day. And actually, what I have a different approach, because, you know, I miss my family so much. So when I come back, I come with nerds, you know, to see my people, to go out in a restaurant, celebrate life, you know, important things. So I don't have any time, you know, to get bored. At the same time, you know, I have those shouting and we do this, do that, you know, so you don't have time to get bored.
That was before the pandemic, I guess. Before the pandemic.
I would like to...
And during the pandemic, because it's the pandemic that I went to Nagorno-Karabakh.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
With masks and everything, you know.
I would like to thank you, all of you, for this very fruitful and very, I think, very interesting conversation that we have had. And I would like to close with a comment by Angeliki Spiropoulou, the professor of Peloponnese University. Her comment is, haunting and eye-opening testimonies. You have all inspired us to make your work a subject of doc art. Thank you. So thank you very much from the part of all the organizers of Gina, from the part of Gina Petropoulou, who she is the chairman of the Peloponnese documentary festival. and see you hopefully next May in Kalamata, and watch together the very nice films that Gina has selected, and also continue our discussion, drinking some ouzo or wine, and enjoying the Greek hospitality. So thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you. Thank you
so much. Thank you. Thank you for having us, and thank you, and good luck with the festival online.
Yes.
To start with.
So Nikos,
you
were inviting us to Greece in May. Henrik and
Gina is inviting you.
Yeah, ready? Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank
Lina,
you.
would you like to say something?